So let's talk a little bit about the black and white thinking that can happen in narcissistic relationships. So let's start with the narcissistic people, right? They live in black and white thinking. It's a signature quality of all antagonistic personality styles. And it's not just them. Other aspects of the human experience can result in people having what's called black and white thinking. It's also called dichotomous thinking. But this black and white thinking is pathological in narcissistic people. For them, things are good and bad. For them, things are good or bad. People are allies or enemies. There are no multiple truths in the narcissistic person's world. You are either in or you are out. Now, if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you didn't know anything. We didn't know what the hell was black and white thinking or dichotomous thinking. But this style of thinking infects the child almost to the point where the child literally perceives good mom versus scary mom, or nice dad versus mean dad. And the only thing the child wants to do is keep the good parent around. The child may even experience them as different people. The child internalizes that responsibility of the parent switching to bad, or for the bad parent coming around, and kind of engages in the lifelong experiment of figuring out what keeps the good parent around. And depending on the parent, that becomes a list of, okay, if I'm obedient, or if I'm silent, or if I'm good at the things my parent wants me to be, or if I'm really helpful, or if I'm never a burden, or I never have a need, if I'm good but not too good so I don't threaten them, and if I never push back and ultimately never develop a true self, just have the self that makes you safe and easy and convenient for the good parent, that's what you learn. The child is confused because sometimes the so-called good parent is around, so any negative emotion, such as anger towards the parent, is often coupled with guilt in the child for thinking that they were mad at that parent. And trust me, if you grew up like this, you get it. However, that narcissistic parent also views the child as either good or bad. And this is projected on the child, which is what drives it for the child. The parent will treat the child in different ways when that parent is more regulated, or when the child is giving the parent what the parent wants. The narcissistic parent is often in almost delusional denial about how badly they treat their child, almost as though it never happened, or perceives their screaming, yelling, or mistreatment of their child as being good for the child. I'm doing you a favor when I'm tough on you, kid. It's why you're great and you're not a loser like those other kids. So even this compliment is a gaslighted disaster of being told that their abuse is good for you and why you are good. So then the child has a sort of confused relationship with the parent's cruel treatment of them. It's really effed up. The child becomes aware of this and internalizes and attempts to be the child who is viewed as good, and experiences that fragmenting within themselves, those traits that are viewed as good, or the moments that add up to them as being as good, can become adult defenses and protections. Foremost amongst those for people with narcissistic parents are things like perfectionism, overwork, not expressing needs, silencing yourself, being obedient, overachieving, being a lone wolf. You don't need anyone. As you get older and perhaps enter intimate relationships, it can be quite similar. I have heard many times and read many times in literature, films, and in real life that when the narcissistic person is feeling good about you, it's as though the sun has come out after a long string of cloudy days and warms your face, and it's shining only for you. It is intoxicating. And part of it is like getting food after not eating for a while. Hunger makes everything taste good. The kind of loyalty that a narcissistic person demands, it's not loyalty, it's cultish. It's never question me. It's do not have your own value system. They demand unquestioning fidelity. It's having to do terrible things for the narcissistic person. Classically, this can happen in the workplace. So you're viewed as the good one. And as a result, Many people who might have actually been allied with a narcissistic person for some period of time will feel a sense of moral injury even years after detaching from narcissistic relationships and learning about them. They may very well feel complicit in harmful behavior they feel they have done because they were doing what they needed to do to keep the narcissistic person close or to keep themselves safe with the narcissistic person. It's very complex. But we recognize that you being good in the narcissistic person's eyes is always only temporary. And the more we become what they want and don't question them or exert ourselves or have a need or ever give feedback or anything that resembles a critique, then maybe if we do all that, we could be good. Unfortunately, no. Because in many, if not most cases, you are not the only person or circumstance in the narcissistic person's life. And perhaps it was a day when people were bad to them. A bad day at work, or the sale didn't close, or someone didn't treat them special at the hardware store, or the cable wasn't working when they wanted to watch a show. Then they will get back to the world is bad way of being and may lash out at you, regardless of how much you are playing the role it seems that they want you to play. The dichotomous thinking is a core issue as to why relationships with narcissistic people are so difficult. Because even if your behavior never offends or places a demand on them, you also cannot control their interior world. Hell, they may watch a television show and be jealous of a car that a character on the TV show is driving, and that can be enough to ping their insecurity, and then the world becomes bad again, and nothing is fair to them, and everyone is mean to them. So it's not just you that's good or bad, it's everything. Life, the world, the government, certain people in the world. There's no middle. It's either all bad or it's all good. And when it is going their way, it's good. And when it's not, it's bad. Initially, before you understand all the narcissism stuff, it's easy to engage and to believe you can reason with them and try to talk them down, try to bring them into the middle, especially when it's not about you. The whiplash that comes from going from being the bad one to the good one can be so confusing that it's difficult to talk about or even make sense of. But when it is about life, family dinner is always bad. This is terrible all the time. Spending time with family never works. And everyone is so disrespectful about all the amazing things I do. You may try to talk them down and bring them into a reasonable middle space. Well, you're wasting your breath, your time, and frankly, putting yourself into a wasted afternoon of gaslighting and pushback and mopping up after a tantrum. Family dinner is either the best ever or the worst. You can't bring them into the middle. And many people in these relationships waste years and years thinking that they can show the narcissistic people in their lives that blessed middle. Black and white thinking, dichotomous thinking, is a bigger part of the landscape of the narcissistic person's what we call dysregulation or lack of emotional regulation. For some narcissistic folks, they're either giddily happily and everything's the best. And at those times, they expect everyone else to be too when things are going their way. And if you are having a bad day on their good day, then you become a problem and you're depressing and you're the bad one. And when things are not going their way, they are often despondent or rageful. And heaven forbid that you're having a good day on one of their bad days. Then you are ungrateful or stupid or naive or can't see how things really are. In the most extreme cases, on their days, when everything is bad, narcissistic people can sound almost paranoid as to how much they think that the world is in a grand conspiracy to make their lives miserable. If you have a narcissistic boss, the workplace is divided into the loyal minions of the narcissistic boss, the people who are willing to do the boss's dirty works and be like the Lord of the Rings, Sauron's orcs, and do the boss's bidding, and smiling like Cheshire cats for the boss, and propping him on his good days, and playing into his paranoid fantasies on his bad days. Those who are actually trying to find that middle, or aren't falling into the cult of the leader, are often viewed as the problem. And either their lives will be miserable while they work there, or they quit. And this is actually how workplaces and organizations led by narcissistic folks crumble. All that is ultimately left are the narcissistic leader and their enablers. And you can't make money or policies or do any meaningful work except the narcissistic person's unreasonable bidding that way. It's really not a sustainable business or institutional model. Now, the mantra that you are either part of the problem or part of the solution, it can become rather bleak in the narcissistic person's hands. You are either an enabler and a never questioner, part of the solution to the narcissist, or someone who may sometimes have suggestions or observations or feedback that may be at odds to the narcissistic person, which then makes you part of the narcissistic person's problem. It's not good. And all of this is what drives that damn trauma bond. The good versus bad creates a vacillation in the relationship. And since you are sometimes good, you may want to stay in that position and stay as one of the good ones and believe that if you can just tweak your behavior a little, then you can get back out of the bad role and back into the good one. And that back and forth keeps you stuck. But this isn't just about calibrating your behavior. It's about giving up on yourself. It's really, well, if I never tell them how I feel again, and I don't bring that up, and I always smile, and I make things easier, and I don't ask for anything, then they'll think I'm good. And when you're not your true self, you are good. And when they are good, and you are giving them exactly what they need. I mean, that's a one-sided life, right? Listen, we all like when someone is being nice to us and complimenting us and making life easy. But we don't stop loving someone in a healthy relationship just because they question us or may not do exactly what we want. We don't think our dear friend is our enemy because they don't come to dinner one night. All of us are certainly happier and more content on good days, and we may need to take a breath, but may not give in completely to the idea that the world is a terrible place because there was traffic on the way to the airport, and then lash out at people who matter to us. We become dichotomized in these relationships, cut in two. So the inner fragmentation that we observe in trauma survivors and in survivors of narcissistic relationships is often played out in real time in the external world because of the narcissistic person's behavior. We live in a reality where we are sometimes good and sometimes bad, and may have always lived in that reality, and thus the risk of fragmenting the narcissistic person ourselves, seeing them as the good them and the bad them. And that fosters the trauma bond. I love it. I love the good them. It's the bad them. That's tough for me. But I'll wait for that good person to turn up again. And we may endure a lot of abuse while we wait for good them to come back, rather than the integrated whole. Their behavior is unacceptable at times, and they don't have empathy, and my true self will not be seen in this relationship, and this is not me, and I can't change it, but there's still times I enjoy the relationship. Dichotomized good-bad perceptions are infantile. For the infant, the good caregiver is the one who is right there feeding and attending to them, and the bad one is the one who isn't there the moment they need it. Natural human development under safe and attuned circumstances means that the baby learns to integrate the two. Bad caregiver and good caregiver just integrate into caregiver, who as a child has a more realistic take on the world, learns that sometimes that caregiver has other stuff to do and that's okay. And that's where stuff like regulation and self-soothing start to form. The narcissistic folks get stuck in this infantile state. We are either the good mommy who is either sticking a pacifier or a breast into their mouth, or the bad mommy who is rejecting them. And this is all very sweet and expectable in a baby, and it's ridiculous in a grown-ass person. But when this happens with our parents, our partners, our bosses, we'll feel crazy. Like, wait, I was the greatest in the world yesterday and now I'm a terrible person? Like, what the hell? The lack of differentiation between me and the world is a real problem for narcissistic folks. And it's a real problem for people who are in these relationships. You aren't their psychoanalyst, and you cannot fix this. I'm actually not even convinced a psychoanalyst can do much either. But this good-bad dichotomy is a core dynamic of every narcissistic relationship. You are not two people, you are one, with a consistent, gorgeous, authentic self in there that sadly is not allowed to show up in this relationship without invoking the narcissistic shame and wrath. And it's important to not let their splitting of you become your reality. For survival reasons in this relationship, you need to understand it and figure out the workarounds. But it does not need to be your reality. Life is what happens in the gray. Love, relationships, all of life is everything that happens in the middle. Because other than gravity, birth, death, and taxes, we have no absolutes. Once you understand that middle path and live it as you, that's really the answer. And that is a really tough place to get to if you are in a narcissistic relationship.